So I think one of the really interesting spaces in programmatic at the moment is really the evolution of private marketplaces and this concept of programmatic guaranteed, and how rather than bidding on inventory necessarily, we've moved to this idea of maybe fewer people bidding on a certain pool of inventory, maybe having fixed price or first look, and now this concept of having a completely fixed buy at a fixed price, and what value does that add in running it through a trade desk. So I think there are a few points to that. The first one, and probably the most important really, is taking the decisioning, the audience decisioning away from the publisher and putting it in the hands of the trade desk on behalf of the agency and the advertisers. So really if you were to spend, I don't know, let's say £30,000 with a specific publisher, let's say Microsoft for example, Microsoft are going to look at all of the campaigns that they've got plugged in or running at any one time, and then decide which audience they're going to deliver that campaign to. And that's all very well and good, but by running it through a trade desk, perhaps rather than just Microsoft deciding where that inventory is going to be run, actually we get a look at 100 grand's worth of inventory, and then we use our own data or our advertisers' data to decide which impressions we want to deliver to a certain audience. And that potentially will allow it to work a lot better. Programmatic guaranteed, I think, is still very much in its infancy. It's a concept at the moment. And we're doing a lot of workarounds and testing because actually the technology doesn't really support a programmatic guaranteed buy. In that if I want to look at 5 times the amount of inventory that I'm actually going to buy, we have to set up a very specific deal ID as a private marketplace. And that is very much a workaround still at this point. And so we're testing it with a few different publishers, but again, very much in its infancy. So I think one of the hottest topics at the moment has been viewability. It's on everyone's agenda at the moment. When you've got ComScore and the IAB saying that 54% of ads aren't being viewed by humans or by anyone, they're below the fold. That is a colossal problem that we as a whole industry really need to tackle together. And then there are other stats. There's always lots of different versions of the stats, but something like 34% I read are actually non-human views, through fraud, click fraud and impression fraud. And that again is kind of a systemic problem that we need to really tackle as an entire industry. And so just buying above or below the fold doesn't necessarily mean something's going to be in view or out of view. And there are a few technologies out there that allow us to look at pre-bid, whether something's likely to be viewed or not. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to actually perform better or worse than if you were to just buy across all the exchanges without that viewability informing your decision. So it's only very recently that the IAB has started to advise that people trade on viewability, but it's not straightforward, certainly from the tests that we've been doing over the last 6 months or so. So programmatic's got to a really interesting space. I mean, what I find is that every 6 months the conversation that we're having with agencies and with advertisers is fundamentally different from what it was 6 months ago, a year ago. We're kind of reinventing ourselves very, very frequently. A lot of that comes from the technology that allows us to bring together lots of different channels in a single view of a consumer across lots of different areas of the internet, be that taking influence from search, from display, from video, from social, and really using those as touch points to find a consumer and then retarget them across lots of different channels as well, and start to have a much more joined up dialogue with a consumer wherever a brand sees them. And that's been quite a fundamental change, and that's something that really seems to hit home with a lot of advertisers at the moment. But that in itself brings across a whole vast array of problems and combinations of how you can join up that dialogue. And that's the really difficult thing, I think, for a lot of advertisers to kind of get their head around, but a huge opportunity at the same time.
What are the issues for the advertisers?
Some of the barriers for advertisers, I think, at the moment are firstly aligning their technology to allow it to speak and allow you to see that single view of a consumer. That can, for a lot of advertisers, can take them months or even years to really start to elicit enough change in technology to allow them to make the most of what programmatic has to offer. And then there is this kind of opportunity for them to craft that user experience as well, and having a transparent trade desk or partner in their space is particularly important. What should my frequency or recency be when I go to retarget users? And is there an opportunity for me to have an ongoing or tell an ongoing story, a sequential message across these different channels? And so the creative element is also a big barrier that so many advertisers really aren't making the most of, whether that's dynamic creative or just, you know, again, sequential, but how do you tell that story across multiple channels? So I think the big opportunity for trade desks and for agencies is to really get on top of this, to help clients navigate this incredibly complex space that is only getting more and more complex with more data, more inventory, all the different types of companies that are popping up. You know, we always see the LumaScape graph get more and more complex every single year, but which are the companies that actually are really adding value to this equation and allowing, you know, advertisers to reach consumers in ways that they haven't before and allow them to be more targeted and more efficient. And that's still and always has been, but increasingly will always become more and more important is the place of advertisers and trade desks in navigating that space. Programmatic also gives a huge opportunity to some of the most premium publishers in the market, in where they've got really interesting data or pools of inventory that perhaps they were only ever selling at the previous deal rate that they had with an agency group. Now the ability to have fair market value for that inventory, but also to slice and dice it really, really quickly without huge sales teams. They've got this opportunity to become more lean and more nimble with the way that they interact with agencies through programmatic. So, do you really still need a sales force of 20, 30 guys when actually, you can trade programmatically and set these things up very, very easily, but also add value to the inventory that you have through the use of data and the ability to segment audiences. And really just, all the biggest publishers today have a programmatic strategy. Some have been slower to the game, but have maybe introduced their own platforms and systems. Others have actually been pioneering this space for a long time in terms of private marketplaces and are a long, long way ahead in terms of how they split up their audiences. But maybe if you're an auto trader and you're selling cars, actually there's a lot of value to a lot of advertisers outside of that space. If you're selling cars over £100,000, that's a really valuable data segment for so many other types of advertisers outside of what they might have thought was their core audience. And that is a huge opportunity for so many publishers to think outside the box in terms of the audiences they have.